Recording in progress.
Good afternoon and good morning to some of us in the western side of our zones. Welcome to this very first joint AILA and Te Pita Ora New Zealand ILA webinar celebrating women in landscape architecture profession during World Landscape Architecture Month. I am Jasmine Ong. I'm the Vice President of AILA and I'm also the Studio Director of Glass, co-moderating today's webinar together with Julia Wick.
Kia ora, I'm Julia Wick. I'm NZILA Te Pita Ora board member and co-moderator with Jasmine today. So before we begin, we'd like to open the conversation with a traditional welcome from each nation, a mihi whakatau from Aotearoa, an acknowledgement of country from Australia.
From Australia, we acknowledge and respect the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of Australia as the traditional custodians of our lands, waters and seas. We recognise their ability to care for country and their deep spiritual connection with country. We honour elders past and present, whose knowledge and wisdom ensures the continuation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. I'm co-moderating this panel discussion today on the land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung. And I'll pass over to Bela to do a mihi whakatau.
Ngā mihi, Jasmine. E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā hau e whā, e ngā iwi mana whenua o Tamaki Makaurau, nau mai, piki mai, haere mai, whakatau mai I runga tēnei kaupapa, whakahirahira e tātou I tēnei rā. Kia ora koutou, a brief mihi to acknowledge the breath of life to all the powers that be, all the voices, to the four winds gathered here, and importantly acknowledging ngā iwi mana whenua o Tamaki Makaurau who have held and continue to hold mana over these lands, and to welcome our cousins from across the moana. Nau mai, welcome.
Kia ora, thank you, Bela. So today we're excited to have Bela Grimsdale and Rachel de Lambert, our Aotearoa contingent, and Janis Fischer and Natalie Busch, our Australia contingent, joining us. So our panelists cover a broad spectrum of specialities and experience in landscape architecture profession, and we're delighted to have them share their experience and leadership journey with us today. In the theme of empowering inclusion, the format of today's webinar is purposely going to be quite organic as we can make it via Zoom. Both Jasmine and I will pose questions to the panelists in turn for them to answer. We've allowed approximately about 30 minutes for this part of the discussion. There's also an opportunity for all those who have attended online to pop any questions you have in the Q&A box. It's at the bottom of your screen, and you can submit those. And if we get time at the end of the discussion, we're hoping to answer those. Please also note which of the panelists you want to answer those, if there's someone in particular you have a dying question to ask of.
So to begin with, we invite each of the panelists to provide a self-introduction and to answer an opening question of what drew them to the profession of landscape architecture. I'll start with Janis Fischer.
Thanks, Jasmine. I'm coming to you today from also from Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung country. I'm based in Melbourne and I've got over 25 years of experience as a landscape architect. I'm currently a director of TRACT, which is a national multidisciplinary practice of landscape architects, urban designers and town planners. We've got about 130 landscape architects across Australia, with probably a number of employees is about 250 all up. So my work that I do, I like to specialise in urban regeneration on a neighbourhood scale, mixed use projects. And I'm really interested in the idea of nature positive cities and being able to deliver that in the projects that I'm doing. I'm involved in AILA. I chaired the Gender Equity Committee for several years, and I've championed the idea of equitable practice both within TRACT but also within the profession more widely. Why am I a landscape architect? Well, initially that wasn't my plan. I started out studying architecture and I was first introduced to landscape when I had a university holiday job in an architect's office who also practiced landscape. And I noticed that the landscape architects were doing the fun stuff. They were drawing with French curves while the architects were tracing plan after plan of apartment layouts. But I was also interested in horticulture and planting design. But the other thing that really appealed to me about landscape architecture was that they were working in the public realm as opposed to the more private realm of the architect. And so I thought that as a landscape architect, you really had the potential to have a greater impact on communities and how they come together in shared spaces.
Thanks, Janis. I'll throw over to Bela Grimsdale now for your self-introduction.
Kia ora, Jasmine. Kia ora tātou. I whānau mai au ki Warkworth, I tupu ake au ki Tamaki Makaurau, kei Tamaki aho e noho ana, kei Landlab aho e mahi ana, ko Bela toku ingoa, ko toku maru te waka, ko Raukawa te moana, ko Kapakapa Nui te maunga, ko Waikanai te awa, ko te awa, Ngāti Raukawa, Ngāti tō rangatira toku iwi. Kia ora, my name's Bela. I whakapapa through my mother. She is from the Kapiti coast in Aotearoa. I was born in Warkworth because my parents lived at Pakiti Beach at the time. They separated when I was about 3, and my older sister and I were raised in Tamaki Makaurau ever since by my father Murray and his partner Te Whānau Pani Tamihana, who is Ngāti from the north. So I had a pretty colourful life growing up, being grown up with my 2 fathers. My father, my biological father, is an artist. He illustrated school journals for over 30 years, amongst many other things. So I was surrounded by art and artists and colourful people and culture. What drew me to landscape architecture? I'm one of those classic people who had no idea what landscape architecture was. After 20 years in the hospitality industry managing cafes, I desperately needed out. I pondered interior design and glad I didn't go there. But it was actually my husband James who said that I should do landscape architecture. And here I am. My background has really influenced where I am today at Landlab. But that's probably enough from me for now. So kia ora.
Thanks very much, Bela. I think such a rich background, and also I've just been reading up about your traditional Māori techniques in weaving, carving, the use of native plants. So really looking forward to seeing more of your work at LandLab. I'll throw over to you, Natalie Busch.
Hi, thanks, Jasmine. My name's Nat. I'm joining you this morning from Whadjuk country in Western Australia. I work at Hassel. I'm the managing principal here of the studio at the moment. I have 2 kids. I'm a mum, and they bring me great inspiration, I think, for the responsibility that we have to the environment and the way that we work. I'd also like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Budja in which we work. I think that there's so much that we can learn from the cultures that we work with, and I draw great inspiration from my friends who I work with in that space every day. So I grew up in a small mining town in regional Western Australia, and I think from a very early age that meant that I had a really strong sense of community and understood the power of the environment around us and the need to respect and understand the systems of places, whether that be environment or people, and really how you need to work together to get really good outcomes. A little bit like Janis, I studied architecture and was really, I suppose, fell into landscape architecture by working alongside landscape architects, and have really enjoyed that opportunity to glue the built environment with the natural environment through the landscape architecture profession. So at the moment in Hassel in Perth, we have 100 people, and I manage not only a group of 15 landscape architects, but 60 architects and a group of about 15 interior designers. So I split my time now between projects and people, and that puzzle of business strategy, which I really enjoy as well. I like people, and I like kind of understanding the processes of, you know, how you can communicate or untie situations to get the best out of teams and projects and communities that you work within. And that's probably enough about me.
Thanks, Natalie. And thank you also. We're the past WA chapter president for the National Association of Women in Construction, and also the State Design Review Panel member in WA, offering independent advice on quality of significant development. So it was a very humble self-introduction there.
We'll get into that stuff later.
Yeah, good. Rachel de Lambert, if you could do your self-introduction.
Yes, kia ora. Tēnā koutou, ko Te Poto o Tamatea, toko manga, ko o Tākaro, ko toko awa, ko Rachel de Lambert aho, ko Bofamisco e Mahiana, I whānau mai o I Aotautahi, Inaere kene Tamaki Makaurau, Inoho ana, Inaene. So, hi everybody, Rachel de Lambert is my name. I hail from the South Island of Aotearoa, Christchurch, Otautahi, but have been in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, pretty much all of my working life, and it is now very much my home. I'm now a consulting partner in Bofamisco, so I'm very much in that phase of looking to transition and support others into kind of all of the leadership roles across Bofamisco, which is a multidisciplinary company, very much like Janis. We span that sort of planning ecology, urban design, biosecurity as well, and then landscape architectural practice. I guess I've morphed back and forwards in my long career in Bofamisco, which is some 35 years or more. I did actually work somewhere else for a brief period of 2 years when I first graduated, and that was in government. In what was then the Lands and Survey Department, went through a restructure, became part of the Department of Conservation, and I guess quickly realised that perhaps I was more aligned to professional practice than I was working in a more institutional environment. And luckily have had the opportunity to work across a whole series of roles in Bofamisco, and I think pursue the sort of the directions that landscape architecture practice continues to sort of throw towards us as well. So working in landscape design in a more traditional sense, landscape assessment and broad scale landscape evaluation, and then morphing more also into urban design practice. I have my eldest sister to blame or thank for being a landscape architect. There are 4 daughters in our family. My elder sister is 7 years older than me, so when I was at school she was becoming a landscape architect, and I followed her around a lot and really learned what landscape architects did through that, and went straight from school to a horticultural degree and straight into landscape architecture. And I guess I'm grateful for that opportunity, because I think, you know, if it hadn't been for Sarah, I probably wouldn't have known that landscape architecture existed. It wasn't certainly something that was generally known at the time that I graduated. Anyway, I should also leave that there and skip on to the first questions.
Rachel, thanks for that. Just wanted to also add that you've won not 1, but 2 Property Council of New Zealand People Awards, and you've also won the Ignite Architects Urban Design Award and the Supreme Excellence Award. So again, another very humble self-introduction. We are so pleased to have all 4 of you esteemed panelists here to take away this enlightening conversation. I'll hand over to Julia to start the questions. Please don't forget to pop your questions in the Q&A box below.
Kia ora. Yes, thank you, Jasmine, and thank you, panel. What a wonderful introduction. I know I've got a million of burning questions, but I will stick to the ones we have pre-talked about. So first up, what factors led to your success, and who or what has been fundamental in supporting your journey? Also, is there any advice you can offer to those aspiring to advance similarly? So I think we're going to start with Janis on that one.
Thanks, Julia. I love going first. No, it's a great question. And I guess when I started out as a landscape architect, I didn't have the ambitions to become a director of a big company or anything like that. I just wanted to be a really good landscape architect and design the best projects that I could. And I think that's the best way to start out your career, is just, you know, making sure that you're the best professional in practice that you can possibly be. And in doing that, I guess you have people along the way who start to give you more responsibility for the projects that you're working on. So that was certainly how I started out. But then, like a lot of women in the profession, I took time off to raise children, and I ended up working part-time for most of my professional career, and I still do because I like it. So that is always a tricky thing. And luckily for me, I wasn't the first woman to do that. I was working at Tract at the time, and there are other women who had done that before me. And I think having those pioneers is just an amazing thing. It just makes each person, makes it a little bit easier for the next person who tries to do it. So I did have that precedent set, but it was still really hard when you're working part-time to progress your career through a company and get to the senior levels of an organisation. And it used to be the policy that you had to work full-time if you wanted to become a principal or a director of a company. It wasn't really possible to do that part-time. But that's changed now, I'm happy to say. And it was the male directors that, you know, who recognised the contribution that people like myself and others were making to the company. So that changed, and that was how I was able to get to the position that I'm in. And it's also the reason why I'm still working for Tract, because they were able to, you know, allow me to do that. I guess my advice for people who are maybe starting out their careers and looking to progress them in a similar way, I'd say don't let imposter syndrome get the better of you, because I know it impacts a lot of people, not just women. And I think you need to really believe in your abilities and your skills and the contribution that you're making. Don't worry if you're working part-time, it doesn't matter. You're still making an amazing contribution in that time that you're working. And it's okay to lack confidence. I lack confidence. I get really nervous about doing things like this. But I think the thing is, if you do lack confidence, is a sign that you're thinking about where you need help, how you can use other people. And I think what great leaders do, they're not the confident people. They're the people who listen to their colleagues, that they're able to consult and collaborate. And that's the way that they get the best results. So that's my advice.
Thank you, Janis. I think we're going to pass over to Bela now.
Awesome. Kia ora. Kia ora, Julia. And thanks, Janis. Yep, tautoko that. I get really nervous too, especially things like this, you know, pushing myself to take myself out of my comfort zone. So thank you for that. But I guess factors that led to my success. Oh, well, it's been a lifelong journey. So again, I will acknowledge my husband, James, as I don't know if I would have ever gone to university if it wasn't for him. I'm a high school dropout. I left college after fifth form, after only passing art and workshop. I moved out of home at 16 and basically just started working. I started at the bottom, washing dishes in a few different restaurants, ended up working at Atomic Cafe for 14 years, working my way through all of the roles from barista, chef, baker, and then finally to manager. Then I managed Queenies and Freeman's Bay for about 6 years after that, before then deciding to go to Unitec to study my Bachelor of Landscape Architecture. But while I was working at Atomic, I did decide to go to Auckland University, where I studied a double major in art history and cultural heritage and museums. I was encouraged and supported by James and my two dads. I needed a lot of help. I was 26 at the time, and I had never written an essay in my life. But interestingly, I've found that there's a massive crossover with my Bachelor of Arts and my hospitality career that has really influenced how I operate and contribute my skills now into landscape architecture. So my full-time job in hospitality was to manaki people in the cafe, look after them, make them feel comfortable, welcome them into the space. I developed close relationships with my staff and lots of the customers. And then there's my university degree where I studied traditional Māori material culture, mahi toi history, art history, anthropology, and that's really complemented the role that I'm currently in now. And I just had an amazing experience at Auckland Uni. I did Māori Studies practical papers where I had the privilege of being taught by two incredibly influential people, Maureen Lander and Dante Bonica. The papers focused on reviving traditional Māori material culture and techniques. So I learned to strip flax, plait. I researched native plants, focusing on women's perfumes, traditional dyeing, carving, and many, many other things. It was an amazing experience. 2 years I spent down at the little Māori studies space. It was proper wānanga styles. Dante would light a fire every morning by rubbing two sticks together. We had potluck lunch together. Dante grew huer. Everything was done traditionally. I think we ate swan once for lunch, but no one asked what the meat was, but it was good. And then years later, I interviewed Māori architect Karen Wilson, and he told me about te wā, which is a state your mind goes into when your head, your hand, and your heart are all connected. It's a creative mental state that he talks about that he went into that was like a trance, and that's where all his creativity came from. And I felt that every time I walked out of Māori studies into the masses of other students just pouring out of their business and psychology lectures. I was in this bubble, you know, the people around me were blurry, but I felt presence, but no one could see me. And it was this amazing feeling that I've recently realized and reflected on back at my time down in Māori studies. But then it was sort of 10 years later that I then pursued my landscape architecture degree. So I'd also like to mention that Phil Wihungi and Olivia Haddon, they were really influential on me. They mentored me through the end of my landscape degree. The poor things, I was a blubbering mess most of the time, but they both created and offered me many opportunities that have contributed to my journey and where I am now. And so my advice would be to take as many opportunities as possible. You get to meet people, you get to experience and learn new things, and you never know where it might lead.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Bella. And I can, totally agree with you with the likes of Phil and Olivia there. They're just such wonderful people. And James and the two dads, I want to hear more about them. They sound absolutely amazing. So you're passing over to Natalie now, back to Australia.
Thank you so much, Julia. Thanks, Bella. I want to cook with you and weave with you and walk on country with you to learn all about your culture. It's amazing. When I looked back and thought about factors that perhaps led to where I am now, there were two things that stood out to me, and there were two places where I felt I got a little out of my depth. And there were places where I really had to rely on the people around me to find a way out. And so the first one of those was a big project opportunity when I was probably about 3 years out of uni as a graduate. It was a big opportunity that came into our studio to work on Fiona Stanley Hospital, which is a $2 billion project with a $21 million landscape spread across rooftops, parklands, streetscapes, a whole precinct. And I'm really grateful to my mentors of that time who just said, okay, Nat, across the road, go for it, your project. Doesn't matter if you don't know much about hospitals or health landscapes, just get stuck in and, yell out if you need some help. And that was pretty scary, but it was an incredible project, and I'm really grateful to be given the opportunity to just figure it out. And from that project, that was a real game changer for me, because through it, I learned that the impact that landscape can have on mental health in an acute environment, where the opportunity to be in nature, to look out to a green space can really affect your mental health. And I thought, what about if we applied that to everyday situations, not just when we're really ill, but where we live and where we go to school and where we work. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to work on that project. I think it did spark my curiosity about different types of landscape, and I learned so much about that sector. I figured it out as I went along, and then most importantly, I stuck at it. So it was a really long project, and that meant that at the end, I became a little bit of a sector expert. So I could really use that opportunity to as a stepping stone to other projects. And I think that's something, when I reflect now and I tell people that I work with, is just stick at it, because it can be really hard. But when you get to the end and you can use those learnings for the next project, I think that's really beneficial. And then the other time where I really got out of my depth was when some colleagues around me told me it would be a really good idea if I nominated to become the president of the National Women in Construction in Western Australia. I'd been on a bit of a working committee up until that point. There was a void for president, and they were like, come on, Nat, I'll be vice president, you be president, let's do this, let's sort it out. And at the time, I didn't feel like I had any spare time to do that. I was working part-time. My kids were just in primary school, and I thought, oh, this is too much. But volunteering, and I think spending that time working for, or volunteering your time for a non-for-profit organisation for something that you're really passionate about, gave me so much energy for the work that I was doing every day. And it gave me an opportunity to expand my industry network beyond landscape architects and beyond the design industry. So I got to create some really good connections with people who were carpenters, who were construction managers on really big construction sites, with engineers. And that broad connection, working for an aligned goal, meant that my confidence of sort of dealing within the industry grew enormously. My network grew enormously. And actually my exposure within the industry really grew. So all of a sudden, all these people within the industry that would see me speak at an event didn't see me as a landscape architect only, they saw me as a leader within the industry. And so that was a really, really amazing 2 years, and still some of the people that I rely on most are the people that I worked with in those committees, and that's led to job opportunities, work opportunities, and I think it was really one of the factors that has helped me sort of grow in confidence with what I do day to day. So looking back at all of that, I would say in summary, I'm a terrible goal setter, absolutely the worst. When it comes every year and you need to set those smarter goals, I do it every year, but I'm really quite terrible, and I never mapped out a future, and I still don't really do that. But what I have reflected on is that I'm always ready for opportunities when they come up, and I'm okay with getting a little bit out of my depth. So my advice to other people would be just go a little bit deeper, ask for support. You don't need to do it all, but have a go.
Thank you, Nat. That's amazing. And just the ability of you there to acknowledge the scary, but, you know, try and see it as an opportunity and stick at it. And it's fantastic. So passing over, last but not least, to Rachel, back to Aotearoa.
Yeah, and I think, I think this kind of success thing is a funny thing, because I don't think you think about yourself, well, I don't, about being successful in that way. I think I've always often kind of been quite surprised by getting an inkling of how other people see you, because you don't see yourself, I don't think, in that way. I think for many of us as landscape architects, you know, being landscape architects is very much bound up in who and what we are. It is kind of our passion, and one of the things the profession offers us is an ability to kind of continually explore new challenges. And I think one of the things that helps us grow and be successful as landscape architects is sort of taking those opportunities to pursue new lines of thinking about things and to sort of push boundaries and to challenge. Landscape architecture has often been the sort of small voice in the room in multidisciplinary projects. So I think just finding your way to have a strong voice in those conversations is something that really helps both you, and I think, Natalie, you've just sort of identified that as well in terms of just how people start to recognise you know, the influence that landscape architects can have, and that it's quite different perhaps to their initial perception of what we might be saying and doing. So I guess for me, attitude is a key sort of reason for success, and the ability not only to be, you know, really good and competent at your job, but also to sort of develop the relationships that mean that we can have influence and, you know, therefore collectively kind of be successful. Because I think, you know, the changing influence of landscape architecture is also something that's really pertinent at the moment, and something that's really evolved over my time, you know, in the profession. So I guess I'm conscious of time and knowing that we've still got 3 questions to go. I guess my advice to others would be around that sort of following your passion. If things aren't right, you know, we have individually and collectively, you know, the opportunity to change things and to seek to change things. And I think there's been lots of evidence in the conversation to date about people sort of taking control and actually making quite significant changes, perhaps none of us more so than Bela, so great credit there in that sense. But I think, you know, being part of change is important. And then just really, you know, taking all of the opportunities that do come along. I mean, none of us don't feel overwhelmed and scared and out of depth and have imposter syndrome. All of those things, I think, you know, they are universal as far as I'm concerned. You know, we might appear confident, but we wake up in the middle of the night with fear as well. So yeah, don't be fooled by thinking that you're alone in that sense. So yeah, moving to our next question.
Incredible, Rachel. I am absolutely blown away by everyone's career journey, and in particular, Bela, your story was just heartwarming. So to move on to the next question, what are the key changes and significant shifts that you've observed during your time working in the landscape architecture profession? And we'll start with Natalie.
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. It's funny, when maybe this is going to reflect starting from an architecture perspective, but when I first started, I feel like everyone was really concerned with how designs or things looked. They were really concerned with the aesthetics of it, you know, the materials, the shape, the form, the proportions. And although we all appreciate beauty a lot, I see that there's been a real change to not only how things look, but actually how they work and what opportunities projects or places create and what the ripples are beyond the site. And what I mean by that is the social opportunities that a place creates, or the environmental changes that you might start with one small thing, but then how that affects things through the passage of time or ongoing is perhaps more important than the first bit that you created. And something that I think I'm really interested in at the moment, we're doing some work with the GBCA to really understand how you measure social impact of a project. I think when we look at environmental, you know, it's easy to measure, you know, the carbon or things like that, but really understanding the social impact of a place or a space of a project, I think is a real game changer, because that is really affect everybody day to day, and I'm really excited about that change.
Thanks so much, Natalie. It's so great to hear about the way you approach inclusivity and diversity in your design work. Rachel, over to you.
So yeah, I guess when I was reflecting on this question, I was thinking, well, my career spans a few generations here, and one of the obvious changes that's happened in that time is around technology. You know, when I was at university, surprise, surprise, there were no computers on our desks, only drawing boards. When I had my first job, letters arrived and we hand wrote them in quadruplicate with carbon paper, and there was a typing pool that everything that left the government agency went via Maureen in the typing pool, who corrected your spelling and grammar and sent it out. So, you know, go from there to Boffinmer School. I remember, you know, when the facsimile used to sort of grind itself up and you'd get that squeaking noise of something arriving with great excitement. And, you know, if you just think about how much faster now the change around technology is happening, this is a part of the field of landscape architecture that I have very little direct contact or actual interest in delving myself into. But I think as a profession, it's incredibly important, obviously. Just, you know, AI and where that will take us, and being part of controlling and influencing that, I think, is going to be really important to us. So that's one particular sphere of just, you know, such substantial change. And I really, you know, I feel for people training now and graduating, just the level of technical skill they need and the speed at which they need to keep ahead of things is really, you know, that I find that quite personally frightening. I think the other thing that I would say also across my time is that there are way more women in the room these days, and the ability to continue to support each other. You know, I think that is changing. It still is an ongoing debate and discussion and need to continue to you know, both evolve our thinking. But I think, as others have said, you know, there have been many doors opened in past decades for women, and it may not feel it, but it's certainly a lot easier than it was 30 odd years ago. So that's another ongoing area, but it is definitely something that has evolved a lot over that time. I will hand over now to Bela, just so that we keep this.
Oh, kia ora, Rachel. Okay, cool. Significant shifts. Yes, good point, Rachel, that there are more women in the room these days. And I actually felt really lucky and privileged, or, you know, like I was in the right place at the right time, being a woman and being Māori. But yeah, this has been a real personal journey for me. When I started at LandLab, it was male dominated. We had 2 females, but now we make up 50% in our Tamaki studio. So that's really awesome. And we've kind of naturally, you know, like naturally our studio culture has shifted and developed over time. But yeah, for me, being relatively new to the profession, I can only really reflect on my experience so far. But I have seen and been part of a shift in cultural engagement and processes. For us, it's not a tick box, and for all of us, it has shifted from the kind of occasional engagement to necessary in all of our projects. We do our best to fully integrate mana whenua aspirations, principles, and values into our work, and also how we work. So how we work has been something that I'm really passionate about getting right. And this kind of came about over the years, hearing and seeing certain principles like manaakitanga thrown around constantly by design studios. When designing public spaces, you know, we are creating a space that supports manaakitanga. And I kept thinking to myself, do people actually understand what that means? And so for me, manaakitanga isn't an abstract concept. It's not just a word on a piece of paper. It's an integrated cultural value that is living and something that I'm really passionate about bringing into the working studio environment. And in the studio, we sort of joke about me being head of Manaakitanga, but it's not really a joke. My years of hospitality, putting Manaakitanga into a full-time physical practice, and then seeing it as a concept written on a plan, I was like, this doesn't feel right to me. But anyway, long story short, after kind of getting my elbows out, I'm now fully supported to embed Manaakitanga as a practice in the studio. And I think that I can say the studio have a pretty good understanding of the value of Manaakitanga now. And so I'm now planning my next principle to embed in the studio. I'm not sure if that really answered the question, but I have seen a positive shift in how we engage and manage cultural engagement, inclusion, and understanding. And we can all agree that it's complex. But for me, it's all about people and relationships and being authentic. And for me, collaboration is alive and well now, but we still need to do better and continue to learn.
Wonderful, Bella. I think that's so topical and really relevant to us in Australia as well, where we need to really improve the way we engage with our First Nations people. And you've got so much knowledge in that area in terms of how you do things in Māori. Janis, last but not least, what are your observations?
Thanks, Jasmine. I think I'm just going to second what everybody else said, because what I was going to talk about is very similar, and particularly Natalie, just thinking back to when you used to design things because they looked cool, that certainly changed. And I think, we used to do community consultation, but it was more about keeping the community up to date with what was happening and trying to facilitate their acceptance of the project rather than it being really meaningful engagement. And so I feel like the discipline of landscape architecture has become a lot more complex and process driven. There's a much greater accountability now in terms of, if you're working on a public project, particularly, you have to go through multiple design reviews, which I think is great, because if you're spending public money on a public space, you really need to make sure that you're doing that in the most responsible way possible. And of course, that includes all of those things that everyone else has already been talking about, First Nations engagement and co-design, making sure that you're meeting your sustainability targets, and things like gender inclusive design reviews and making sure that spaces are going to be culturally safe, all of these sorts of things that we really didn't think a lot about when I started out in landscape architecture. So it makes for a pretty interesting profession, I think, when you're dealing with all of these issues.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Janis, and the rest of the panel. So we've had a bit of a brief on the background of the panel, and we've had a bit of a look back, and we've seen some of the changes, and some of those, as you mentioned, Bella, have been particularly significant in terms of the values and engagement and inclusion. So now we're just going to have a little bit of a look forward in terms of the landscape architecture profession. So question 3 to the panel is, what are your current thoughts on the landscape architecture profession, and what do you envision for the future? So I think we've got Rachel, you're kicking us off for that. Yeah, thanks, Julia. Well, I remain incredibly positive about landscape architects' place in the profession and across a really broad range of opportunities. I mean, it's a pretty turbulent time here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, I'd have to say. We do have a government that doesn't appear to care very much about a lot of the things that are really important to us. That would include, it would seem, some of those aspects of Maori values, certainly natural environment, urban amenity and communities. So there's lots of challenge on that front. But governments come and go, and I think that doesn't sort of focus what we do in many ways. That we sort of continue to strive independent of those sort of political influences. And I think across the board there are things around our collaborative processes. Bela has talked to a very changing aspect, and it's true across both of our countries, around really a much more deep understanding
of our Indigenous cultures and a realigning of how we understand and work with. And I think, you know, that draws deeply into the work of landscape architects, and you can see the spaces that are evolving in so much of a richer way as a result of that. And you know, it's the soft engineering as well as the physical place that I think is really making a difference as well. So I think, you know, that's something that, you know, I really look forward to seeing, you know, how we continue over the next years and years and years around changing our places around both past, present, and future in terms of our communities and diversity, and just the social side of places. There's clearly, you know, a change in our skill sets as well, and opportunities very much amongst the challenge of climate change and sea level rise, and the ability to use our skills in that area. And I think, you know, there's a lot of opportunity to grow and develop more skills aligned to landscape architecture and influencing landscape architects' place, whether it's in aspects of, you know, managed retreat, which will definitely in a small, very coastal urban country be a challenge for us in the coming decades. So I think, you know, I reflect on the sort of opportunities and challenges that existed for landscape architects as I graduated, and looking at those broadly now across all of the sort of from design through to master planning and environmental management that landscape architects have skill sets across. And everywhere you look, there are really significant challenges and opportunities for landscape architects. So I kind of, in some ways, wish I was starting my career again in that sense, in terms of just the broad opportunities and areas in which different landscape architects can seek to have real influence and pursue their career. So challenge, but great opportunity as well. So something that I'm looking forward to being part of and watching as well in the future. So I'll hand on. I'll read the order correctly this time because I muffed it last time. Sorry, Janis, and you do come next.
Thank you, Rachel. Look, I think we've got a lot of work to do as landscape architects. We've got so many challenges that we are in a really good place to be able to tackle. And I do sometimes wonder whether there's enough of us in Australia and enough people with the right skills. So that's one challenge. But I guess, is it a case of being able to do things more efficiently? And is that something that technology can help us with? And I think this is something that we'll be thinking a lot about in the next few years. Is there a way that we can, you know, do what we do, deliver on all these challenges coming up in the future? And I guess, you know, in Australia, we're, don't know about New Zealand, but we have a massive housing crisis in Australia, and we've got most of our population living within cities. So there's all of this development that we have to do just to ensure that we've got healthy and sustainable places for our people to live, and places that are also future-proofed for changing climate and risks to biodiversity. So I think whenever you're starting a new project, I think there's 4 questions that I'm going to leave you with that you should ask yourself. Number 1, whose country am I on? Number 2, what's the local ecology? 3, who is the community that you're designing for? And by this, I mean both humans and nature, and also the future generations. And the 4th question, what's the legacy that we will leave on this place and on this community? So I'm just going to leave it at that and hand over to whoever's next.
Thanks, Janis. I think that is me.
Bela. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, what I envisage for the future. I think we all know that Indigenous culture has become more and more an integrated part of our environment and our work that we do. In Te Ao Māori, we have always been connected to the environment. and we can learn so much from mana whenua and mātauranga Māori. There are so many commonalities within landscape architecture and te ao Māori thinking. And I guess following on from my last kōrero about embedding Indigenous values and principles into our projects and practices, you know, I'm talking about like putting these principles into everyday practice, because until then we don't really fully understand them. And when I was talking about manaakitanga, you know, trying to embed manaakitanga in the office, it's all of us understanding kind of what those layers are, and it's you know, it's complex. It's a, you know, complex layer of kind of building relationships with mana whenua, you know, really understanding you know, why we want to host people and make them feel like they're safe in a safe space, developing a really trusting relationship, so that we can you know, have that respect from mana whenua. They trust you, they you know, they want to help and kind of, you know, give as much knowledge as they are willing to give when you've built that relationship. So yeah, I just can see that this is playing, you know, it'll play an important role for the future of landscape architecture and cultural engagement, is if we think about how we actually put these values into practice. And I'll pass it over now to Natalie.
Thanks, Bella. I'm going to reflect a little bit on something that Rachel said earlier about the importance of creating relationships with influence. And when I kind of think about the landscape architecture profession, we're incredible problem solvers, and the skills that we have are so diverse. But sometimes I think it's seen as a little bit of a career of passion, and we perhaps struggle to see or sell our value as a profession. And so I think in terms of going forwards, I'm probably going to leave a little bit of a challenge for all of us, because I think we're really good at speaking to each other, and even here in this conversation, we're speaking about all the things we're passionate about to each other, and we all get it. But I think what we need to do is burst out of our own box a little bit, and we need to make sure that we know our own worth kind of in other forums when we have these conversations. And I think we have a responsibility to make our profession really valued, really sought after, and then really rewarded. And with that, I think that's really important of the future of the profession. And I think Janis might have mentioned it as well when you said that there's perhaps not enough of us. And I think we've got a responsibility to make sure that that our children or our children's children want to become landscape architects and want to learn these skills, but also that they see it as a viable career path, you know, because they need to buy places to live, they need to turn on their lights as well. So I think really understanding our own value and really kind of learning those business skills so that we can, you know, not only create designs, but really create influence sort of beyond our own realm is really, really important, because we need to ensure that there is a pathway and ensure that there are landscape architects in the future, and really kind of expand our sphere of influence, I think. And we need to get paid, really, you know, we need to get paid for that worth as well. So I know that's a really fundamental, boring thing to sort of leave things on, but I think everyone together, we need to lift each other up to lift our profession up.
Thanks, Natalie. And so relevant to do with pay, we've got a question from Rita Fernandez. And I'll pose this question to Janis because it's related to gender pay gap in career development, and how, and whether you've got any advice in dealing with this and what strategies you think should be put in place to address this issue. And Janis has been the chair of the Gender Equity Committee for AILA, so as in a really good position to answer this one.
Thanks, Jasmine. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that most companies, whether they're landscape architects or otherwise, have issues with the gender pay gap, and it's something that's probably come about partly because of unconscious bias, but also the career breaks that lots of women have during their career. So I think it's something that's improving, but there's still a lot of work to do. So if you're in Australia and you're working in a company that has over 100 employees, those companies now have to report to the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, and those gender pay gaps actually get published publicly. So you'll be able to find the gender pay gap for your company on their website, if that's something that you're interested in. If your company isn't that big, it's still okay to ask them, what is the gender pay gap? And if they're not providing that to you, then I think that's a concern. And I think we're at a stage now where, because we're talking about these things openly and these figures are available, that companies really do need to do something to make sure that they're doing the most that they can to minimise any gender pay gaps that they have. So I think it's all right to ask the question if you're worried about it. If you're working at a company and you feel like you're not getting paid fairly, then just ask the question. Just one thing else I will mention is that there is a practice note that AILA prepared when I was on the Gender Equity Committee, which actually steps out step by step how to do a pay gap audit in a company. So there should be no excuses for companies not being able to do that. Thanks, Jasmine.
Thank you, Janis. So I'm just sorry, we're just sort of moderating on the fly there for some of the questions. But we have had one hint through, which is quite broad-reaching, but it's, what is your favourite one project and why? So I did threaten that I was going to ask this of Rachel. Sorry, I'm going to pass it over to you, Rach.
I think actually what I would reflect is, rather than my favourite one project, is the project that kind of was a decline at the Environment Court in relation to a project in Hawke's Bay. And what it is doesn't really matter, but I think the things that actually make you think and stronger are the things that, you know, perhaps challenge you most. And I think when you kind of feel like you're really convinced yourself that something you're proposing is really strong and good, and in fact others don't agree with you, I think that's really, those are the things that actually make you learn and change your thinking and evolve your thinking. So I guess that's my response. I mean, those are the things that I remember more about my career than remembering projects that I like, I guess, or that, you know, are more successful perhaps. So yeah, it's the things that make you stop in your tracks and rethink that are important.
I couldn't agree more, Rachel. Big thank you to all four of our panelists today, Bela, Janis, Nat and Rachel, and also, of course, to all the attendees online. A recording of their webinar will be made available soon, both on the AILA and NZILA websites. Julia.
Yes, thank you, everyone. It went by very quickly. I'm sure there's a few more questions that we didn't quite get to. But yes, we'll conclude with a closing karakia led by Bela. And thank you again for joining us today. And it was wonderful to have you all in the company.
Kia ora, Julia. Before I do close this kōrero with a short karakia, I'd like to share this beautiful whakatauki with you all. Tawhiti rawa tō tātou haerenga te kore haere tonu. Maha rawa wa tātou mahi te kore mahi tonu. We have come too far to not go further. We have done too much to not do more. Me inoi tātou. Mauri oho, mauri tū, mauri ora kia koutou katoa, haumi e, hui e, tai
Bye.
ki e.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.